saying the world was laughing at America. In a leaked audio recording of a video conference between the president and state leaders, Mr Trump can be heard calling for 10-year jail terms for rioters.
The call came as the police officer charged with the murder of an unarmed black man, George Floyd, had his first court hearing postponed. The death unleashed a week of protests across the US, with more than 45 million Americans under curfew overnight and authorities bracing for more violence. We're going to go to our correspondent in Washington, D.C., David Lipson, in just a moment. But first, I want to show you these live pictures coming in from Times Square in New York. Extraordinary crowds gathering there mid-afternoon in Manhattan, and no sign clearly of numbers diminishing as they gather across for what will be the 7th night in the US of these protests. Yeah, just gone 4 o'clock over there. A number of curfews still very much in place across American cities. They'll fall in some cases by the time we're off air this morning, so I'll stay across the still very fluid situation in the States. Right, well, let's go straight to David Lipson, who is in Washington, D.C. Good morning, David. Another night of protests. We've seen some of the photos. What is the latest?
Well, good morning again, guys. We're back at the White House, outside the White House. As you can see, a much smaller, a much calmer crowd today. But part of the reason for that is about 200 or 300 protesters have just marched off down that way in the direction of downtown DC and Congress. Now, you can see that there are still riot police that have lined up protecting the White House, and a little bit further across you may be able to see this structure that was burned last night. It's just a shell now. There's graffiti all over it. The protesters clashed with police and Secret Service officers for many hours through the night. I can tell you the situation right across downtown Washington, D.C. right now is a hub, a hive of activity as workers board up every shop they can, every shop front, from hotels, from chemists, coffee shops. Everything is being boarded up. So clearly there is a view that the destruction is not over, and there was a good deal of vandalism and the like overnight. Even in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., kilometres out from the city centre, we saw shops looted and the like. And this is the case right across America. We now have more than half of the American states that have called in the National Guard. More than 25 governors have done that. And we have more than 45 million Americans operating under some form of curfew.
And David, an indication of how concerned they are about what's ahead is that Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, is going to have a curfew of 7 p.m. tonight. While in Minneapolis, George Floyd's brother has spoken. What did he have to say?
Yes, well, he went to the scene where George Floyd was killed about a week ago now. He was very emotional. He had to be held up as he approached that scene and had a few moments there surrounded by a crowd, mostly of cameras and other onlookers. And then he addressed the crowd and he really just urged them to stop the violence. He said it was not doing anything to honour the memory of George Floyd. It was not the way that George Floyd lived his life. And he said quite powerfully that the best thing that they can do now is get out and vote. Vote for the party that they believe will do something to actually stop the police brutality in the future. This is a little bit of what he had to say.
What are y'all doing? What are y'all doing? Y'all doing nothing. Because that's not going to bring my brother back at all. It may feel good for the moment, just like when you drink. But when it comes down, you're going to wonder what you did.
Yeah, I was watching some of his speech and he got them chanting, you know, protest on the left, peace on the right, really pushing that message. Meanwhile, we've got the president really giving the governors and law enforcement officials a pretty stern message, David.
He certainly did, and he did it once again behind closed doors. This is the second day that's nearly over that we have not heard a single public utterance from the president, apart from a few angry tweets. And we saw leaked within minutes, really, at the conclusion of this phone hookup with the governors, words of the president going after them, claiming that they were weak, saying that they should pull in the National Guard, and making the point that Minneapolis, where all of this started, he said was a laughing stock around the world until it called into the National Guard, and now they have restored order in that city. And actually the National Guard in Minneapolis is starting to stand down, so there is some good news amongst all of this. But it seems, with the president not giving any public statements, he is either unwilling or he is considered to be unable to offer any soothing words to the nation at this time.
David, we were just watching live pictures again of Times Square there, so we're going to check in with you a bit later. Thank you. In other news, well, Perth, a large crowd rallied overnight there in a show of solidarity with